Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from LastCar.info, and welcome to Behind the Wall after the conclusion of the Xfinity 500 at Martinsville, where unofficially, pending the results of post-race inspection, Ryan Blaney has punched his ticket into the championship four in dramatic style. 1 year after running his tail gunner to Joey Logano in his successful championship bid at Phoenix last year, Logano is well and thoroughly out of the championship contention this year, having been eliminated much earlier, and Blaney has now made it to the last round here, goes up against Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, and William Byron. Again, this all contingent on the results of post-race inspection, which we'll find out, I suppose, later this evening here. Again, maybe not the most competitive Martinsville race in terms of, a lot of physicality and lead changes out there, but definitely the drama was still there, especially cars that were not handling as well as they needed to. In the case of William Byron was certainly central to the story today. But again, congratulations to Ryan Blaney for pulling off the victory today. Again, the winning after breaking through on his winless streak in the 600 earlier this year, the dramatic photo finish at Talladega before Kevin Harvick was disqualified, and then now pulling this one off here. Absolutely fantastic for them. And again, we saw this last year when Christopher Bell was in a pretty much a must-win scenario last year and still had some problems there in the championship four, wasn't able to pull off the bid there. But this year, Bell himself finds himself in a better position, having locked in his spot last week at Homestead. And then, this group completed here. I think, as they mentioned on the broadcast, I think these four should put on a good show. You only have one past champion, and Kyle Larson only has the one championship, which, of course, was in the last race for the Gen 6 car before the introduction of the next-gen car. So the odds are looking pretty good that we could potentially have a driver score their first Cup Series championship, and at worst, in comparison to that statistic, still have a driver that's still very new to winning championships and only getting their second. It's so hard for drivers to get multiple championships these days, and I think that would be just as much the accomplishment for Larson if it turned out that way. But a real just crazy weekend in general. We'll definitely talk about the Xfinity Series race here as well. We got some trivia to discuss. We also have some LastCar news to discuss here as well. Quite a bit coming up here, both next week as well as what may or may not have been clinched today in the Cup Series race here. So quite a lot to get to, and we'll go ahead and just jump right into it here. Ryan Blaney, your winner there today at Martinsville. Driver that has many times seemed to always be a factor at this track and hasn't quite pulled it off. Finally breaks through and gets his first grandfather clock here in the Cup Series, rather. For how good he had performed out there. Seemed like, that was one reason I picked him in my fantasy league. It seemed like he was just always coming really close and at least getting a top 5 or a top 10. They brought up, to their credit during the broadcast here, a lot of the statistics that he's had, near misses in the past there, but finally able to put it together, especially after how well Blaney put Hamlin to task at the Homestead race last week. It seemed like he definitely had some momentum carrying into this one. And ultimately, has pulled off the victory there. So amazing job for him. You have to give a call to Eric Almirola for a tremendous run. And the news, of course, broken earlier today that Almirola will not return to full-time Cup competition. He has left open the possibility of returning to Xfinity or Truck Series competition part-time. I guess this actually broke over the earlier in the weekend. I guess it was Friday or Saturday. But regardless, earlier in this weekend here, and this being the first race afterwards, Almirola put up easily his best performance of the entire season. I know he was leading for a bit of New Hampshire. July race at Atlanta seemed like he was doing pretty good at points. But this time around here, coming home second place, unofficial margin to victory, 0.899 seconds. So just under 9/10 of a second there for Almirola. Put together a fine effort in a year that's also been not just an off year for him, but also for the Stewart-Haas Racing team. You think back to the spring race where it seemed like all four of the teams at least had their moments in that one. But this time around here, Almirola doing a fine job there and getting the second place finish there out of him. Really, again, I think, it's one thing to look. I know that a lot of people talk about the length of the races And if that needs to be changed at some time in the future, I think it's going to be more and more interesting, especially as these drivers, we start seeing a lot of this turnover, which does happen. But it seems like the commonality between a lot of these drivers stepping away is they do talk about how long the season is. And I know whenever I tell friends that are not interested in the sport about it, they're always interested in the same way they were back when I was a kid, back during, times when the sport was a bit more popular. Saying that the season starts in February and ends in November is just like, wow, that's insane. You think about all the sports that crosses over. But, again, I'd like to think maybe squeezing, a few races off the schedule there would tighten things up a little bit. But then again, there's always been a youth movement. There's always been new drivers coming in there that are more than capable, where 36 races might not be enough for them. And they find ways to race in other series there too. So that could be another issue that gets examined further on. But it is a bit sad to see some of these drivers that have been in the sport for years. Harvick, of course, getting the central amount of attention, is deservedly so, for his championship and the other past wins that he scored in his career, as we now come down to his final Cup Series start coming up next week at Phoenix, where he still carries that top 10 streak coming into this race after the near miss there in the spring. But again, Almirola in the same respect there. We'll see his last Cup start, at least as a full-time driver for Almirola's case, and see how that goes going forward. But yeah, kudos to his crew. Kind of reminiscent of, you see this every once in a while. It seems like it's a bit more rare these days with stage racing being what it is. But I think back to Ricky Rudd at Sears Point in 2005 and what was going to be his last season, staying out on old tires, trying to hold off Tony Stewart. Other drivers being in that position and trying to kind of capitalize on getting a good run. Would have been a great story. It's unfortunate it didn't work out there, but they have nothing to hang their heads about. That was a fantastic run they had out there, and they could still finish the season on a high note there at Phoenix, even with all the hullabaloo that's going to be going on there with the championship. So we'll find out what happens there. Third place to Denny Hamlin. This one's definitely a bit of a surprise. I fully expected Hamlin to be in the championship along with William Byron. I thought for sure they would be the last ones in there. Even though picking Blaney to win the race, it seemed like it was still going to be a long shot to an extent, at least for it to work out in the championship. I was hoping at least he'd have a good run in this one here, kind of like what he had over at Homestead. But Denny Hamlin and his history at Martinsville, it seemed like that was going to be something that was going to really help him out. And third place is still a great finish. Still shows, again, the skill that he has at this particular track. But unfortunately, at least in the unofficial results here, just a few points short. And those few points could be any one point or another. I know probably that penalty at Phoenix for the, what he was saying on the podcast about Ross Chastain. Maybe that comes into play. Of course, nowadays, again, you have the regrouping after the regular season and the way things shake out from there. Maybe in the aggregate, it's not necessarily the same status as Mark Martin and the issue he had in 1990 when he had a full season championship. But any one moment, and he was already mentioning in the post-race interview, of course, the issue that he had at Homestead with the steering issue, putting him into the wall. That one definitely... I was not entirely... you expect him to be disappointed, understandably so. A heartbreaking way to lose a shot, at least at a good finish, and staying a bit closer within striking distance of a spot in the championship for there. But it kind of reminded me a bit about 2010, when Denny Hamlin came into Phoenix when it was the penultimate race of the year and dominated that. I think he led 190 laps and then ran out of fuel towards the end. And Carl Edwards ended up pulling off the victory there, and then that changed the championship complexion from there. It was a very difficult situation, and not the first time that has happened to any driver, of course. But still a heartbreaker. I fully expected Hamlin to come into this championship and claim a spot in the championship for. I figured the podcast was actually going to be a way that he could kind of clear his mind and make things a little bit easier. I think that, and I still hope going forward that, a podcast like his is going to be something that's going to make these drivers a little bit more personalities and really kind of bring open what they're talking about. Because I know we've had other ones. Of course, you got Dale Jr.'s podcast, and you have other active drivers that have their shows, whether it's Stacking Pennies or anything like that. But Denny's, I think, has really stood out this year, and undoubtedly this show is going to be pretty challenging this week here for him too. But I mean, again, you put yourself out there, that's the possibility that always can happen. But again, I think that there was a lot that was talked about online here about, drivers versus teams, whether people follow a team or a driver, what's the element of star power, and how to bring that back, how to bring it anything closer to where people can recognize these drivers standing out in a crowd. The drivers need to be allowed to be more outspoken, and I hope that becomes kind of a legacy of this year. And I hope that Denny continues to do his podcast there, because I think it's been really entertaining. And he's been very open. And I think for as much as, there's still reports that he got the most boos leading into this race, they're paying attention to him at the very least. Where, I think even he would take boos over just ambivalence and maybe, not hearing that much from the crowd. So I hope that in this next year and then in years to come, and NASCAR is going to have to play a part in this too, not in terms of making sure they have podcasts, of course, but more to allow them to be outspoken. I think that what happened at Phoenix in the spring race there was a bit of an overreaction, honestly, with Hamlin bringing up that he put Chastain in the wall. You're coming along with me. Ultimately, didn't involve any other drivers. Wasn't a championship race. If NASCAR wanted to give him a slap on the wrist, maybe a fine, I don't think that would have been nearly a problem, but a points penalty was just absurd. So, again, I think that it's unfortunate there. I thought Denny was going to be a shoo-in for sure for the championship. He seemed more relaxed this year, more confident. But yeah, I think he's right to say that maybe the Homestead race had a disproportionate effect there on how things performed for him this season. Chase Briscoe, he was pretty good, I think, in this race last fall. And again, another Stewart-Haas team that performed, above average, given how much that team has struggled this year. Good to see him get a good finish. Joey Logano, another driver, finishing in the 5th spot there, had a disastrous season, whether it was a last place run at Vegas, problems just left and right, real issues with consistency, still gets a decent finish there and has something to look forward to in the race that he so thoroughly dominated last year at Phoenix. Kyle Larson in the 6th spot, of course, punched his ticket in the first round of these playoffs here in Las Vegas. Still gets a solid finish right ahead of Christopher Bell, the Homestead winner, in the 7th spot. Chris Buescher was as high as the 6th place spot, was on about the same strategy that Almirola, Corey LaJoie, and some other drivers were. Still managed to stay up there. I don't know if he had an issue with fuel or anything towards the end, but he did stretch it out and still had a solid finish there, so good job by him. Doesn't make the playoffs, ends up last in the group of 8 here. But again, nothing for them to bow their heads about here. This has been an absolute breakout year for the RFK racing team in general. Brad Keselowski, I mean, he could win. Again, who knows what will happen at Phoenix, but I expect them to be just as strong in the Daytona 500 next year as they've been the last couple of years. I think whoever wins that race is probably going to have to take it away from both of them. Especially for how good they were in both races, and then, of course, the 1-2 finish in the summer race here. And maybe Keselowski breaks that 0-1 streak since his last win with the Penske Racing team. Unfortunately, had some engine issues here during the race today after the incident with Daniel Suarez and Ty Gibbs in the middle stages and dropped him back in the order. But again, the RFK Racing group there, I think they got the right strategy. Hopefully just stay with 2 cars, don't try to expand, and continue to build that organization. They have a lot to be extremely grateful for this year. It just didn't quite work out in this round, which is unfortunate. I think these were 3 tracks that Buescher, maybe not so much Martinsville. Actually, I was more concerned about him here than he was at Homestead at Vegas. But here he probably had one of his best runs of the 3 with the performance here in the 8th place finisher. Austin Cindric, again, I know a lot has been talked about the sophomore jinx, Daytona 500 winner from last year. But again, quietly has had some solid runs. Hasn't really been a last car contender. I haven't seen him really as much featured in the articles this year compared to even last season. But finishes in the 9th spot. And kudos to Todd Gilliland, a top 10 finish in the second Front Row Motorsports entry, the number 38 car. Great job for them. Again, this is a track where he's had some history there in the Truck Series in particular. Having to share that ride this year with Zane Smith. And other drivers rotating in and out of it there. I think that's still a fantastic run out of their organization there, and still something very positive for the folks over there at Front Row Motorsports there. So kudos to them. We have to talk about other drivers a bit further back here in the lineup. Looking back here, Kevin Harvick finishes his penultimate race in the 16th spot, one lap down. Chase Elliott was leading on a bit of that strategy there for a bit, ends up finishing back in the 17th spot, one lap down. Corey LaJoie, we saw him in the top 5 there for a portion of that strategy. Good to see him in the mix there. He ends up back in 22nd at the end of this race. Michael McDowell, Gilliland's teammate, in 25th. Tyler Reddick seemed like they just kind of missed the setup here in this race in general in the 26th spot. But have to mention in the same mix here, I know we've only touched on him here a little bit, William Byron, congratulations to him on punching his ticket into the championship 4. I know maybe not the way they wanted to, especially for how dominant they were in the spring race here last year. I fully expected that they would be just as strong, and maybe they'd have to take it away from them, and maybe Denny Hamlin would be in that situation. Absolutely was not the case today. They had a terrible car in qualifying. Driver was just mystified through the weekend. Comes back out in the race here, trying to get the best run that they can. A 13th place finish, that's probably the best they were this entire race. Ending up the first car one lap down as Blaney lapped him in the closing stages of the race there. It really shows, and that's a championship drive as much as anything else. It's very easy to look at a driver who wins the race or leads the most laps or racks up all those stage points, but a driver like that where maybe you have a 25th place car and you really are just, nothing seems to work right. It's very easy to just say, look, it's just not our year. We're not going to be able to make it. I think he showed a tremendous amount of heart. Him and his team. It's not just a one-person thing either, too. The crew chief and the team and everybody else rallying together to try to just make lemonade out of lemons here and get a great run out of it, finishing in the 13th spot there and punching their ticket to the championship 4. Now he goes into a race that he won in the spring, admittedly after a late race restart, but who knows if that's going to be the situation again here next week. Tremendous effort for him there. So congratulations to Byron for punching his ticket. And then also right in front of him in the 12th spot there, absolute heartbreaker for Martin Truex Jr. Unfortunately, much like with Denny Hamlin, it's hard to put a smiley face on that. Obviously, with all the struggles they've had, especially in the playoffs this year, then the off-track tragedy of Sherry's passing. It's been just a difficult stretch here, and I think that they were looking if they could at least get through this round, have some halfway decent runs, and get into the championship 4, then they could be just as strong as they would have been the last time that they were in the championship 4, and trying to get a good run out there. But just wasn't meant to be. Despite winning the pole, despite leading a lot of laps in the beginning of the race there, before Denny Hamlin and Blaney kind of assumed control of the race, it seems like it just wasn't meant to be, and it's awful on that end. Fortunately, we are going to see him next year. He at least confirmed that. I think the one positive you could bring up and kind of to pair it what the broadcast discussed here, the comparison from last year. A winless season last year really just seemed to be at loose ends. I remember him at Sears Point when he made a late race pit stop in a race that theoretically, like his crew chief said this year, you come with Martin Truex Jr. to Sears Point, you come there expecting to win. He was completely out to lunch in that race that Suarez won there. Made a late race pit stop that dropped him even further back. He was holding up traffic at turn 11. And then to come in to have all that frustration and then come into this year, you win the Clash, you take it away from the dominant cars there with whether it was Ryan Preece having a breakout run or the Childress teammates with Kyle Busch and Austin Dillon to come in there and win that race. Admittedly, an exhibition, of course, not a points-paying deal, but that was a real shot in the arm for that organization this year. They really showed a lot more consistency in the regular season to get the regular season championship and not having to kind of squeak their way into the championship. It's unfortunate what's happened since then in these last 9 rounds here. But again, I think there's at least some positives from the regular season they can look at to try to build up for next year. And we'll find out how all that shakes out at the same time. Looking at the back of the pack here, we definitely have to talk about this. So, coming into this race, the last car Cup Series championship was going to be probably one of the biggest runaways of the 3. The Xfinity and Truck Series championships entered this race and exited as very close titles, and we'll talk about those scenarios here in a little bit. But the Cup Series, it basically came down to B.J. McLeod or the Dillon brothers. You have B.J. McLeod coming into this race with 4 last-place finishes, which is the most of any other driver, most recently at Darlington in the Southern 500. The only driver with 3 last-place finishes was Ty Dillon, including your last-place finisher at the Daytona 500 when he repeated Bob Schacht's feat of finishing last in both the 500 and his 150-mile qualifying race in the same year. He had 3 last-place finishes and most importantly, more bottom 5s and bottom 10s than BJ had this year. Of course, BJ has been sharing that ride with other drivers, including Josh Bilicki and others there along the way, Anthony Alfredo as well. So that also playing a role there. So basically, if Ty Dillon finished last in this race, he would have the lead going into Phoenix, but BJ would have a chance to respond and still prevail there in the championship next week. But that is, and again, actually, I guess the gap would have been high enough that maybe Ty Dillon would have locked it up. Because if, let's see, because it would have been 4 each. No, they would have been 4 each. Because then, yeah, he would have been tied with BJ, and then BJ could respond and get to 5. So that was about, and as close as that sounds, that's nothing on what we'll be talking about here in a little bit for Xfinity and trucks. But B.J. McLeod starts last in what was one of the only Halloween paint schemes on the Cup Series side. But really cool deal there with that. Apparently, their deal with Joe Falk, who has had, of course, a long history in NASCAR's Cup Series there. The Falked Up Garage sponsorship on the hood of the car. Great paint scheme. Unfortunately, not a great run out there. Overheating issues from the very beginning of the race seemed to be an issue, despite a really close battle there with J.J. Yaley. Very hot track. Weather, of course, was certainly an issue this weekend. But had a side-by-side battle between Yaley and McLeod in the early laps. This ended up shaking McLeod back to last place. McLeod was the first driver to be lapped, and they ended up at the back of the pack there until the spin with Harrison Burton off of turn 2. Burton and Alex Bowman being involved. Both of them end up shaking out as the only 2 drivers 1 lap down, as B.J. McLeod, Yaley, and the others take the wave around to get back on the lead lap. Then you have a battle between Harrison Burton and Bowman for the Lucky Dog spot that before the end of Stage 1. Unfortunately, by the end of Stage 1, BJ loses a lap again, along with Carson Hocevar and J.J. Yaley. Yaley gets his lap back, and then BJ McLeod takes over the last spot again. On the restart, Kyle Busch comes down pit road for a flat left front tire. Busch comes back out, takes the last spot from McLeod, comes back around him, but about a lap 149, I believe it was, BJ suddenly turns into the garage area, reporting the overheating issue is worse. Temperature of over 300 degrees on the water. Did not want to blow an engine and drop fluid on the track, especially after NASCAR had spent well after darkness buying up all the Tide they could get at local stores to clean up after the mess that was the conclusion of the Xfinity Series race. BJ ultimately pulled the car behind the wall, told his crew, "We'll see you in Phoenix." And unfortunately, as a result of that, that has been his 5th last place finish of the year, and that would lock him up his 3rd NASCAR Cup Series championship, pending the results of post-race inspection today. If something happens with the 77 in particular, or the 3, that could very much change the outcome of what happened. We did see this last year, keep in mind. Last year, Brad Keselowski was disqualified from a top 5 finishing spot in this race and took the last place spot there and kind of shook things up a little bit going into the last race of the season. But unofficially, pending the results of that inspection, B.J. McLeod is your last place champion for this year in the Cup Series, the 3rd, following 2019 and last year in 2022. So again, could be that we'll have a certificate for him here. Wait until, of course, we get the word here. Hopefully on the show tonight. I think we have plenty enough to cover here. That'll probably cover until we hear back, but we'll find out there. But B.J. McLeod out with overheating issues. First time that a Martinsville last place finisher in the Cup Series finished last with overheating since 2014 with Clay Rogers and a BK Racing start and park entry, which is also, incidentally, the last time that there was a start and park in the Cup Series at Martinsville. I will absolutely be talking about the Rick Ware Racing charter issue that came up this week, too. That definitely demands more discussion there. J.J. Yaley in the 35th spot, Daniel Suarez in 34th, Brad Keselowski 33rd, and Alex Bowman in 32nd. Frustration on J.J. Yaley's radio. I did not hear this myself, but big thanks to Colby Evans on Twitter for tracking this with the number 15 team. Apparently, Yaley had a flat tire after the incident that happened in turns 3 and 4, where Suarez's car was driving at a weird angle, and Brad Keselowski got some damage in that, Ty Gibbs as well. Yaley's car was stopped, couldn't keep going with a flat tire, and unlike what we saw with Joey Logano at Pocono earlier this year, where they drug his car around the track, which ultimately didn't work out anyway because it knocked the pieces off that car and they were pretty much done anyway. Yaley's car wasn't towed back to the garage on a much smaller track, and he ended up going behind the wall, and then that was it. And then he was told to get out of the car, and his day was done. Frustrating deal there for him, especially with trying to get the best runs that he can out there. Had some frustrations in the Xfinity race too. But ultimately a scenario where he ends up out of the race early. I do agree, much like what we talked about back at Pocono, and has come up several times since then, why they can't just put a roller under the front of these cars and drag them to the garage area and not have to worry about that. You know, you don't have to change the tires out there. You don't have to do anything like that. You don't have to do anything that's going to have a competitive effect. But at least have a situation where you can get the front of the car off the ground and tow it behind it and actually get it behind, get it to the pit road where the crew can work on it. And then have that 7 minutes where they can make the repairs or not. And then if it turns out it's too much to fix, as much as I don't like the crash clock, if that's the rule that they're going to keep in place, let them have a fighting chance at it. Because, I mean, that could be disastrous. Imagine if a championship came down to that. Imagine if somebody being eliminated or not came down to that. I know it may seem like it's not a big deal because it's Rick Ware racing and it's a driver further back in the pack that didn't really have a shot at winning. But still, I think what's not fair for them would not be fair for the rest of the field either. And so I think it's something that does need to be re-examined. I think the folks over at Steps that have taken on this responsibility as the tow truck drivers here of the series and having all this equipment ready there, they need to really adjust to that. And I don't know why that hasn't been happening this entire season. Hopefully we see it beginning of next year, because that definitely needs to be something that's definitely worked on. So yes. And then we saw, among other things in this race, we saw a pace car getting towed to the infield as well, which is a little bit of an unusual circumstance. You think back to the pace car, I think it was when the clash was on the road course and the wigwag lights, the Wheelan lights there caught on fire. And they had to kind of, get the people in the car and bail out of it there. Pace car, strangeness has happened before, but apparently, according to the reports from people over at the track there, a lot of rubber got under the car there from all the marbles that he was rolling in and ripped the wiring out from under the car, and it just shut off, just killed it. Had to get the backup car back out there and finish off the race. So, kind of a little bit of strangeness there along the same paths there too. Seeing other news there towards the end of the race, our Steven Toronto, not from last car here, but Steven Toronto, S Toronto 92, I still insist is one of the best follows there on Twitter there for trackside coverage there, this being his last trackside coverage for the year, showing that there was attention being paid to Ryan Newman on pit road, some heat exhaustion there. Certainly hope he's doing well. I don't know if there were any other instances from that, if you guys have seen anything else on that end there. But we'll hopefully, we'll see if there's any more updates there at the same time. But certainly an exhausting race. You can really see it on the faces of all the drivers there, whether at the front of the field or the back there. That was the same situation. But yeah, a little bit of everything in there. Again, I'm glad that NASCAR didn't have any ridiculous cautions that came up at the end there to create some artificial drama. I think that, the race played out to its natural conclusion, and we could very well see the same kind of race play out at Phoenix next week, like we saw last year, with a run to the end there. And, again, whoever is up front, again, it's, that's the way it plays out there. So, it's going to be interesting to see. We got our championship coverage, coming up next week. We're going to be traveling to the track, this Wednesday, November 1st. We got the door magnet all set up. We got other things set to go here for our trackside coverage there for championship weekend. We're really going to take it in this year because we're not planning on covering this race next year. We're looking to maybe move our coverage up to maybe more of the summer there, and take advantage of maybe some of these new dates or moved around dates for next year, and kind of give you guys a little bit more variety in terms of our coverage for next year. At the same time, Sears Point and hopefully the Clash will still be part of that, just because those are close to here at Last Car headquarters. But we'll find out. We'll have more updates on that in the near future at the same time. So look forward to that at this for all of this. I got to give a shout out before I forget here to Harrison Burton, who was in last place after his spin off of turn 2. Was in the Lucky Dog battle with Alex Bowman. Ultimately finished the race in 15th spot, one lap down. Great bounce back, not just from this race, but also from last week when he got his first career Cup Series last place finish. I think it's a tremendous turnaround for him. So kudos to him on bouncing back here at the same time. Let's see. What's a good way? Let me pull this over. We got the second screen hooked up here, folks, so we'll probably be doing a little bit of show and tell here. We do have some show and tell here for later in the show at the same time. So we will see. I do see another post from Steven. This is 39 minutes ago here. Ryan Newman was able to get up and walk to the medical cart, did not need a stretcher. So kudos to him for the update on that as well. Alrighty. So, okay. So, we have to talk, again, about yesterday's Xfinity race and what on earth was happening there. So, we'll talk about not just the battle for the lead, but we'll also talk about the last car part, but we definitely don't want to bury the lead here in the story. Justin Allgaier punches his ticket into the championship for the Xfinity Series, but not until after a complete mess in the final 15 or so laps of this race that made it much more resembling a demolition derby at best, or a AI picture of these cars just exploding in all different directions at worst. Just a disaster there at the end, and a disaster of multiple proportions here. Unfortunately, it was unfortunate to not get a clean race towards the end of it. I don't know if that's too much to ask for the Xfinity Series when you have a lot of developing talent out there, and you create a situation where drivers are just going to really be driving over their heads. I think ultimately what started this was a caution that should not have been a caution to begin with. There were a lot of single car spins towards the end of this race, the last of which being Anthony Alfredo's spin in turn 4, where he seemed like he was getting the car going again and nobody else was near him. I understand a situation where you got the leaders bearing down on them and you don't want anybody to get in a wreck. And maybe it just seemed like they were awfully quick to the button there on that. And it ended up being a situation where now, we get to be down to the last 10 laps of this race. And you have you got just a couple of championship spots here left open. Who's going to be in, who's going to be out. You would imagine that the teams would be communicating to their drivers what exactly they needed to be doing in these circumstances here. And unfortunately, that didn't turn out to be the case. So first and foremost, after Alfredo's incident, we have a big pileup on the back straightaway. It looked like, I don't know whose car exactly it was that ruptured the oil cooler or something, but basically ended up with fluid all the way around the track, about a 30-minute red flag, during which time, you again have plenty of time to figure out what the championship scenarios are, tell your drivers what on earth is going on, especially Richard Childress Racing, which at the time had Austin Hill, who was on borderline in terms of needing to win necessarily, and then Sheldon Creed, who absolutely needed to win after a pretty off and on stretch here and squeaking his way into the round of 8, had a fluid leak at the beginning of this race as well and was up there. Could have been a situation where, as Robbie Gordon said in his tweet earlier today, they could have potentially both made their way in there. And the team really had to figure that out. And I know it's a dynamic situation, but there's really no excuse for neither of these drivers, especially Austin Hill, who we found out in the interviews after this race here. We're not aware of the scenarios that could result in them being in the championship or not. When you have a 30-minute red flag, I can't believe everybody would be just sitting on their thumbs and just waiting on, anything to happen here. You got plenty of time to kind of figure out what you need to do, what you need to avoid, and, and most of all, just kind of, calm down a little bit as best you can and try to rationalize what's coming up here. So to be caught off guard when you got a 2-lap restart in overtime after all of this is just absurd. So there was that to begin with. And I guess we probably, from here, should probably go into instant replay mode here and talk about what exactly did happen. Obviously, Sammy Smith had a great race up to that point, led 147 of the 256 laps. Looked like he was going to also have a shot, pretty much in a must-win situation himself after pretty mediocre runs, certainly in Las Vegas. He had a late race pit stop there. Homestead, I don't really remember how he performed, but at least was able to kind of stay in touch with people there. But Martinsville winning the pole, having the best run he could, similar to Truex, really. The same, Joe Gibbs Racing and another team there having a fine run there, but ultimately ends up in the third place spot there. So let's jump into all of this. I got the 1 lap to go. Let me get the actual. Let's pull it up on YouTube. That'd be easier than trying to do it on Twitter here. And let's look at that finish once more and try to figure out, what on earth was happening. Martinsville, finish 2023. Okay. We don't need that. And we don't need that. And let's make sure the sound is working here. Okay, of course, now we got all the Cup Series stuff here that's moved to the front of the line here, but we'll jump in as best we can. Alrighty. So it seems like from the discussion so far, hang on, that we're still definitely, there's been so much that's already been posted here about what the culture may or may not be at Richard Childress Racing, or views of Austin Hill in particular, and his response to, what undeniably was a frustrating situation, but if that was really warranted as a result of what actually happened out there. Let's see, why is it so hard I would think there would be just a ton of these clips. I think the confusing thing is I'm putting in Xfinity, and it's pulling up, of course, the Xfinity 500. Xfinity Series, come on. I had a clip where it was just the last lap, but of course you want to pull up the last two. Okay, we'll pull up one here that has the whole race and just cue it down. Okay, there we go. It's on mute, so that's good. So yeah, we do want to use the not necessarily the telestrator, but close to it. All right. Okay. Come on. Okay, let's switch over to the second screen. There we are. Is the big screen better? Nah, big screen might cut that off. Well, actually, we'll go ahead and try it with this. And then if it gets too cut off there on the screen, we can always work around that too. Okay. So
here's another look at what happened.
Okay, let's move up here to the actual restart. You would think they would not make it hard to find this clip. I am very surprised they don't just have a standalone video of the last restart, but they don't. Go figure. Okay. So, right at the front of the pack there, you have Austin Hill, the number 21, looking to punch his ticket into the championship. One of the best drivers from this year's Xfinity season. I was really thinking that, again, much like with Denny, I couldn't visualize a scenario where he wouldn't make the championship for. Sheldon Creed, again, squeaked his way into the championship round of 8. The news was, and I'm glad this was confirmed later on there, I'm glad it was confirmed that Childress was the first one to come out and say that Sheldon Creed was coming back. I thought that was the case, that it wasn't Creed announcing it first. Now, again, I don't know if it was Creed telling them that he wasn't coming back, but still, the team coming out and announcing it first, if you have a situation where these guys are going to be on the front row, you better be planning something. I can't believe that there would be a situation where they didn't, they were just be like, oh, I guess they'll just race clean, or, oh, I guess this will just sort itself out. No, especially when you got right behind him, you got John Hunter Nemechek, who's like the winningest driver this season, and you got Justin Allgaier behind Creed, who, always seems to, much like Austin Hill, just capitalize whenever somebody has a bad run or when Austin Hill has a bad run. So okay.
Red of one bank. Hill on the inside, Creed on the outside. Back to the gas they go.
All right, so a lot's already been said about John Hunter Nemechek making this bomb move to the inside and blocking his teammate Sammy Smith there at the same time. Obviously, a lot of criticism about like trying to break out a line and getting an unfair restart. In this one here, if he stayed there, we probably would have had another caution. Smith probably would have gotten the back of him, intentionally or not, and you get a big pile up, and then, you got some more of these guys wrecked, and we have to do another restart anyway. Again, it's tricky because it's to the inside, so it certainly could be perceived of as an advantage. But I think, and again, it's hard to tell with this from NASCAR because we never really hear about this. There probably comes a point where so much has happened and NASCAR is just going to look to just get the finish in no matter what and just be done with it. Especially if they're going to spend a half an hour cleaning up from a previous one here. So, okay, so here we go. Now, Creed, first of all, is giving, look at all this room down here that Austin Hill has. This was not a situation where Creed came down and pinched Hill into the curbs and tried to knock him sideways and wreck him out. We didn't see any kind of replay of the situation from what we had with last year with Ty Gibbs and Brandon Jones. Again, hard racing. You got two guys here that are going for championship spots where where it may be a scenario where both of them get in or don't, depending on who finishes where. But they're going for it. And I think I repeat kind of what Denny Hamlin said at Homestead when people were criticizing him about how he was racing Blaney. It's like, what do you expect? Of course they're going to be racing each other hard. They're racing for a championship spot. And this is where NASCAR's responsibility is in all this. If they're going to create a winner-take-all atmosphere, you should be happy that somebody here is actually going to give their teammate this much room, especially in a situation where Allgaier right here in third could potentially find his way under him even this early. So again, right now, I don't see any particular fault. Now here, Hill, despite having this room, is already coming up into Creed here. And again, but hard racing, this is what you would expect. I don't want people to start hyperventilating because of contact. I don't want a NASCAR. I think if NASCAR starts having that happen, it's just not going to be the sport anymore. So hopefully that's not going to be the the norm going forward. But let's queue up here.
Way up the racetrack goes Hill.
So great job by Hill. Now Hill, to his credit, did not put Creed into the outside wall off of turn 2. He's almost clear of him here. And luckily, both of them have cleared Allgaier by enough ground that they could kind of settle it between themselves, at least so far. Of course, if either of them slip up, Allgaier is going to be there, which, of course, was relevant in the finish. And yes, as Robbie Gordon pointed out, yes, good man. Get right on Austin Hill there going into turn 3. Now, in this situation, we could have had something very much like last year. Creed, who has not won an Xfinity Series race, who needs to win this race to make the championship 4, could, teammate or none, do a Ty Gibbs thing and just send Hill into the outside wall into turn 3, wreck him, have a late race restart where, again, he's going to be next to Justin Allgaier here on the restart, and then that's going to be, it. But going into the corner,
Creed into the back of the 20.
He gets into him, and he gets off of him coming into the corner. Look, Hill hasn't even lost control of the car fully yet. So again, it's absolutely fair. If you can get to him and get him loose, that's the name of the game at Martinsville. What do you always hear in these? You got to hug that inside line the fastest way around. You got a curb that means you can't go any further down there. You don't want to get higher up here, not only because of the marbles on the track, but also all the debris from cleaning the track. And so there you go.
21. He doesn't push him up high enough, but here he comes.
He doesn't push him up high enough. Yes, he did, Rick. Okay, yeah. He gets under him here, and Hill comes back down. So again, Hill so far in all of this has been way more aggressive than Creed has been. And Creed has had 2 opportunities already that he could have absolutely cleaned Hill out in just this lap. And we're not even to the last lap of the race yet. And again, a winner-take-all scenario.
He gets to the inside.
Could have spun him out here, too. Now, again, Hill just clears him. But
legs in the air.
now, all right, there. Now, at the same time here, when I was watching this live, Allgaier bounces off the wall, clips off the nose of John Hunter Nemechek. I thought at that point Allgaier was toast. I figured he would drop back, and they would be at least this far back, and then it was certainly going to be down to the 2 leaders. That was going to be any problem. But I'll tell you what, JR Motorsports, and by extension Hendrick Motorsports, because, it's basically the same thing here, they built some pretty durable cars, because that was a solid hit that the 7 had off that corner. But again, so now we have Austin Hill out front, and what does Creed do?
More time around, the 7 got into the wall.
Hug that rear bumper, try to get him off the track again. Could have cleaned him out here. He's now had three opportunities to dump Austin Hill from the lead. And I know it's disappearing behind the chat here, but you can see even from there that he's just getting under him. This is about the spot where Brandon Jones would have wrecked last year. Still going.
Up the racetrack. They're side by side.
There you go. Side-by-side battle. It could be just, now at this point here, you could just have a photo finish all the way to the stripe. And whoever gets to the line first is whoever's going to get it. And you could be just as happy for Hill and Creed. You probably get both of them to the finish like this. They'll probably be shaking each other's hand in victory lane. Be like, hey, it was a hell of a race. It was a hell of a show. So, okay.
Get into the championship 4.
So, side by side, boom. Now you got Hill coming down into Creed again. So now we've had a couple instances where the 21 has come right down into the 2.
In the Xfinity Series.
And Creed still squeaks his way through. Now, okay, so here seems to be the central moment that everybody's wondering what exactly was happening. So Creed gets door slammed going into the corner, squirts out here into the front, and he's skating up the track here a little bit. You got Justin Allgaier now door-to-door with Hill in position to capitalize if both these guys take each other out. Now, as far as I'm seeing, Creed is skating up the track. He needs to make sure he stays in front of the 21.
Here comes the 7.
So he gets the car back under control, and apparently SMT data did indicate he hit the brakes. Do I think he stabbed the brakes to deliberately wreck his teammate? No. I think he was trying to maintain control of that car. Now, it would be great to just keep your foot in it, and maybe the car goes straight against the wall, but of course, as we know, you can't do the Hail Melon thing. You can't do a wall ride to the finish. So that's probably why he was hitting the brakes.
Contact made!
To keep from actually wrecking his own car. And now he's got a side-by-side battle to finish. It's unfortunate with his teammate that there's been some collateral damage that's crunched the nose in, and now his car is basically dead in the water, and it's going to get tangled with Nemechek, and everything that happens after this is going to happen anyway. But yeah, so then Creed comes down to the finish. Unfortunately, Justin Allgaier, just like at Daytona, gets just alongside him here, and Creed doing the best he can to stay right with him. They get locked together, and Allgaier pulls off the win. So we got a big mess back here, and we'll go ahead and play the rest of that. Massive hit for Jeb Burton.
Big contact.
So I think the question now becomes, and watching all of this, what out of all of that was stupid by Creed? He had 3 or 4 opportunities to straight up dump his teammate and make sure that he wasn't going to be in the championship 4. Would have had a late race restart, which may or may not have worked out for him with Allgaier next to him. As we saw from Daytona, it could have been just as easily a situation where he couldn't have made, he could have still lost. Where was it warranted for Richard Childress to come out and say that, this is basically like the stupidest driver that he's had? It's been Sheldon Creed. Creed showed under tremendous duress a driver trying to win their first race. Think back to Daniel Hemrick at the championship race a couple of years ago. To really kind of get alongside his teammate, gave his teammate plenty of room when that teammate wasn't giving him any room. In fact, was running into him way more times than Creed was running into Hill. And giving him plenty of room and still having a situation there. And again, the car was probably out of control going through turns 3 and 4. I give him the benefit of the doubt there too. I don't think he brake checked Hill to try to take him out. At that point, you're just looking at the finish line. You're looking at positioning your car in the right spot to actually get to the checkered flag. Sheldon Creed did nothing wrong. He did nothing wrong there. And I'll admit a bit of bias there because I've been pulling for him, trying to pull off his first Xfinity Series win. But I also respect Austin Hill because, again, he's had such a good season this year. He deserved to be in the championship 4 as well. We could add, potentially, depending on how this race worked out, a situation where both of them made it in. And I think they would have both put on a good show. But we end up in a situation where not only both of them miss it, where Austin Hill is deridedly, clapping at the Sheldon Creed's crew and then leaking, where Creed's going next year in his post-race interview, where Andy Petrie is coming out there and shouting at Creed. It's just absurd, completely unwarranted. And kudos to Creed for standing his ground and all this too. He was well within his right. And any other driver was in there, if Ty Gibbs was in that 2 car, that would have played out very differently. Even if it was his teammate in that situation there too. It would have been the same situation that we saw last year. But we didn't see that. And I thought we saw a hell of a race under the circumstances there. And then to cap all this off, for Austin Hill to also be interviewed and not be aware of what the championship scenarios were, to factor in how hard he should be racing Creed, and again, that really goes back to him because you saw those times that he made contact with the 2 car. It's absurd. And the only leg he has to stand on is talking about him supposedly brake checking him in turn 4. Well, at that point, yeah, he's just getting squirted up out front after contact from Hill. And again, trying to just maintain control of the car and position himself to the line. So yeah, the only thing that he's guilty of, that Creed's of anything, is not being able to pull off the victory there against Allgaier. And it shows that Allgaier was fantastic at capitalizing on the opportunity. But yeah, it was unfortunate. And it was a moment that the team really should have rallied together. I know that it's so easy. We talked about this already with, Denny Hamlin and other drivers here that did show tremendous grace in their interviews after the end of this race today. Even as brutal of a loss as it was, especially for Hamlin and Truex, I thought they handled it remarkably well. I'm not sure I would have, but I'll tell you this. That should have been a moment where the team really rallied together and said, look, I know Sheldon's leaving for another team next year and all that working out. You would hope that they would rise above that, or at least, not be as flagrantly furious at Creed. It's like, you would expect your guys to be racing for it. You would expect them to be actually bouncing off each other at the end. And those drivers should be expecting the team to inform them of what the hell is going on, so they could capitalize on every moment. I don't like team orders or anything like that, but they just need to be aware of what actually is happening. And it's like, if it turns out this way, maybe both of you will get in, or if it's going to be like that. So just kind of keep this in mind when you're racing each other. And if you had a 30-minute red flag, I can't believe that didn't happen. But by all accounts, it seems like that's exactly what happened. So just absurd. I feel bad for Creed, who not only, once again, doesn't get his first win, isn't in the championship for, is now getting dumped on by Petrie and Childress, who, I get it, they have a right to be frustrated. It sucks to not have both your cars in there when you have a chance to get both of them in there, and you're one lap away. I'm not going to tell them to be happy about that. Of course you're going to be frustrated, but you don't take it out on your team like that. It's just awful. And the optics of it are just terrible. I mean, especially when you're trying to market, you got Jesse Love coming in next year, and you're trying to bring in new sponsors in there and all that. It's really unfortunate. And I know that, you'll at the same time, the sport really breeds on, this kind of emotion that comes into the sport and really makes it even bigger than it is and all that. And that's a part of it too. It's the reason we watch it also. But it's unfortunate to see it get that ugly. And I'm not expecting drivers to be happy when they lose, especially when something happens with their teammate. But Austin Hill should have taken way more responsibility for what happened there. And the team should have taken way more responsibility in communicating to Hill and Creed about what they needed to do on that last restart. And they certainly can't say that they didn't have enough time or presence or anything when they had a long red flag leading up to an overtime finish. They had plenty of time. They could have drafted an entire strategy for this and Phoenix in that 30 minutes. It's absurd, just absurd. So that's kind of where I'm looking at, at the situation there too. So, and it's not fair to Creed in particular for Childress to come out and say he's like the stupidest driver that he's ever hired. I mean, that's just really over the top. I know a lot of people have been, taking free shots at different drivers that Childress has had over the years, one or the other. I'm seeing him mention the chats there too. But yeah, that's going to be, it's just frustrating and it's disappointing and it's it just doesn't augur well going into the next season because, one way or the other, you got to work together. And I know Creed's not going to be there, but you're going to have other drivers that are. And, it's really outrageous because we didn't even see this kind of drama last year where Brandon Jones was well in position to absolutely be beside himself from how Ty Gibbs raced him in the race last year, where Ty Gibbs is getting booed by the crowd out there. You would have expected maybe this to happen more in that situation, but we really didn't see it, not in this same way, not to this level. So that's the unfortunate deal from that, and that's kind of where I am on that. Obviously, as much of a bitter situation as it was, and to have Hill miss it by just a few points, still, it's unfortunate that it worked out that way, and I hate that it worked out like that. So that's another part of it too. So I think also, if anything else, it really should point out to just how good Creed has been. I know the other unfortunate part of all this is that Creed to this point, especially going into Portland back over the summer, seemed to have a reputation of just being run over by other drivers out there. And that was another thing that was kind of making me focus on him a bit more and just seeing him kind of start to kind of fight for himself and defend himself. I'm glad he didn't take that laying down, talking about, what would have been if it was the other situation, where Creed, where maybe if Austin Hill got into Creed, bumped him out of the way, Creed wrecks and Hill wins a championship or punches his ticket or something like that. What would have happened then? Fair question. And I think that does raise some legitimate questions as to what's happening over at that team. But it's going to be a story I'm sure we'll just be following much more into next week and then into next year, whatever the situation is going to be. Regardless, looking at the other side of the points here for the championship, John Hunter Nemechek punches his ticket in on points earlier in the race. Again, another driver fully expected to be in the Final Four. Glad that he made it in spite of the damage. And then Cole Custer backing his car that was on fire across the finish line to make it into the championship four, finishing in the 19th spot there. Kudos to him. Really showing, never say die moment there for him there to try to get the best run he could under the circumstances, especially when a lot of drivers were just a few feet from the finish line and couldn't capitalize on those runs. Great effort for him there too. Again, I still think it's John Hunter Nemechek's championship to lose. My opinion on that has not changed, especially even with Custer being in the mix there and Allgaier and Sam Smith still being a factor. I think he's going to be very tough, folks. I think next Saturday, that's going to be one to watch. It's not over till it's over. People can always find another gear like we saw out of Joey Logano last year. But again, it's going to be a story. That's for sure. So looking at the results from the Xfinity Series finish, Justin Allgaier in first, Sheldon Creed in the second spot. Margin of victory, what on earth was it? Or did it still listed as a caution flag? Nope, 32 thousandths of a second between first and second. Sammy Smith in the third spot, again, fine run for him. Unfortunately, didn't quite work out for him. Dug himself a little bit too much of a hole in Las Vegas. Riley Herbst in the fourth spot there, almost getting another shot at a win here. So we'll see how things close out for him. Josh Berry in the fifth spot. Daniel Hemrick, Parker Retzlaff in the seventh spot. Another great top 10 run for the Jordan Anderson team. Anthony Alfredo in eighth, one of the first wrecked cars to come across the line. He was dead sideways across the stripe. Jeb Burton hit the car flush with the passenger side there. Good to see him get out. That was the first thing when I saw that wreck. To see all four tires off the ground on the straightaway is pretty alarming to see, but I'm glad he got out of that thing okay. Parker Kligerman rounding out the top 10 in this race. Lane Riggs just on the outside of the top 10, 3 or 4 starts into his career, has just had great runs in all of them. Obviously, Kaulig Racing, you would expect him to be that fast. Raja Karuth, his last start in the Alpha Prime car for this year before he goes into the Hendrick Motorsports deal next week. That's going to be a story I'll be very excited to follow next week to see how he performs in that number 17 car. And again, we'll see if he can get his first top 10. This run in 12th place when he was skating through the wrecks there ties his career best finish, Caruth's that is, with the 12th place run that he had in this same race last year. CJ McLaughlin was at the back of the pack there in the early stages, had an overheating issue, finished in the 13th spot, ties his second best finish. So a great run for him, especially on what was really a disastrous day for RSS Racing. Their other three cars had all kinds of problems there along the way there, but finishing in the 13th spot. Josh Williams' car was knocked to pieces there, finished in the 14th spot regardless. Myatt Snyder in 15th place. John Hunter ends up in the 18th spot. Biggest heartbreaker, I would have to say, just outside of the playoff contenders, would have to be Blaine Perkins. Perkins had the fastest car in practice, best run we've seen out of our motorsports this year, probably the best we've seen out of that team since 2020, back when Brett Moffitt was driving for him. Fantastic run that he had out there, the payday car. Ryan Daly, so many Ryans in the illustration or the graphic design field out there these days, put together a beautiful paint scheme. Same person did the cover for the Derek Cope book coming out November 14th, Tuesday, November 14th coming up here. Great paint scheme there, the payday scheme for the 02. Looked good, looked fast, was in the top 10 for most of this race, worked his way up to about the 6th spot, ends up in that wreck, ends up backwards, just short of the line. Couldn't have been more than 100 feet, if that, from the finish line there. Ends up dropping all the way back to a 22nd spot. Was not at all indicative of how fast that driver and team were this weekend. Really a heartbreaker for him. Hopefully things turn around there for him there and has a decent run at Phoenix to kind of cap things off here. This leads us kind of more into the last place championship deal. So, coming into this race, excuse me here. Coming into this race, Parker Kligerman, Greg Van Alst, the only two drivers with two last place finishes all this year. Van Alst, those last place finishes were pretty much the only Xfinity starts he had. And Parker Kligerman, the only bottom fives he had all year, were his last place finishes there too. And he's had a consistent enough year that any driver that had one last place finish, and because these two drivers are the only repeaters all year, had a massive list. I believe at least, like 20 different drivers that could have potentially taken the lead from Kligerman if they finished last in this race. So what happens? None of these drivers finish in last place. Instead, Kyle Sieg gets the first last place run of his Xfinity career in, I believe, his 40th start. Has number 29 car, flat tire, hits the outside wall, takes over the last place spot there. Devin Jones was last at the beginning there, driving for Bobby Daughter. He ends up with an engine problem later in the race and gets 37th. Chandler Smith in 36th, Ryan Sieg and J.J. Yaley rounding out your bottom five there. Rough weekend for Yaley in general. But Kyle Sieg, being another first-time last-place finisher, did not have enough bottom fives or bottom tens to take the lead. However, has now put himself into last car Xfinity Series championship contention. And so what was I doing last night? Well, folks, let me show you this. I was printing a ton of certificates. And let me turn this right side up. Look at this one right off the bat here, folks. If you want a really crazy situation next week, believe it or not, Sam Mayer, who is one of the championship four, because of this craziness here and not having a different driver out there that finished in last place and not having anybody eliminate anybody else, Sam Mayer could win the last car championship. If he finishes, he's going to have to finish last in that Phoenix race, which of course would take him out of the championship four, which of course would result in not a very fun interview, I would imagine. But I have to mentally prepare myself because that could potentially be a situation here. It's no longer the situation where he can win the championship and the last car one because he's already too far back in the standings that he would have to finish in last place. The more frightening scenario, and I wouldn't wish this on anybody, he wins a championship and gets disqualified, and then ends up getting this instead. I think if that happens, I'm not even sure if I'd even mail this at that point. I guess I probably still would, because otherwise it's just going to have to go on eBay. But there you go. But you'll see in the graphic, I even put the blue spoiler on his little car for the graphic there too. So now, if he finished last at Martinsville, that was going to be the really crazy one. And he did crunch his nose running into Josh Bilicki, but not until after Kyle Sieg wrecked. And he did not finish the Martinsville race. If he had just completely not done anything, he would have finished last in this Martinsville race. He would have taken the lead in the last car championship, and if he won the race and nobody else beat him, then that would have been the situation that he could have won the championship and won the last car championship. But now it's going to be all or nothing. So now it's going to be one or the other. And if he wins the championship, he wins the championship. If he finishes last, he could be walking away with this, and that could be the factor there. So that's how close this last car championship is. And how many other people are in contention? Look at all of these. All these other drivers are in contention. Let's just go right through them here, folks. So, yeah, record with mailing with no return address. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So first of all, and again, this is in no particular order. So Parker Kligerman, of course, is leader, and he's in this stack. So we got Sam Mayer. We have Brennan Poole, who almost won the championship last year when Eric Estep had the paint scheme on the number 6 car there. He actually came in as the leader last year. One of the drivers that was eliminated from contention was the championship person that beat him last year, which was Bailey Curry. Curry is now not in contention this season, so you will not see him on this list here. So Brennan Poole, Sammy Smith, another driver that was in the championship 8, is also potentially one here. So he could potentially walk away with it. Parker Chase. Now, again, this is going to include drivers that may or may not be in the race. We've seen Chase more often run the road courses and super speedways. So he could potentially be in there too. I went ahead and made all these just in case somebody comes in as a relief driver or the entry list changes after we leave on Wednesday. I want to make sure we have as many of these as possible here. So anybody that's even remotely in contention, even if I'm pretty sure they're not going to be in the race or they may not be in the race, these have already been made. So these are all set up here. So Parker Chase, Brett Moffitt, who has had a great year, the number 25, the AM Racing deal. So he's potentially in there. Kyle Sieg, who just punched his ticket by winning this, by getting this last place finish, gets his first last place finish. If he sweeps the last 2, he walks away with this one. So we got that situation. Some of these drivers, there's only a couple scenarios where bottom 5s would be enough. Parker Retzlaff, your last place finisher at Sears Point, last time I was at the track, could potentially walk away with the last car championship. Joey Gase, I already gave one of these to him in the Cup Series. I could potentially give him one in the Xfinity Series if he enters this race and ends up finishing in last place. Sage Karam, who had a great run over the summer, still finished last at Pocono, could potentially walk away with this. I don't even know if he's entered or not. This could be another one that just ends up being kept in the back of the field here. Greg Van Alst, again, hoping he's recovering well from the injury that he had at Talladega. Regardless, as the other 2-time last place finisher this year, if he just so happens to enter this race and maybe just runs a few laps in it or anything, we have that settled here. We have this one on hand just in case we need it. Probably won't need it. We're going to find out there. Parker Kligerman comes in as the last car Xfinity Series championship leader. Here is his certificate for the number 48 Big Machine Racing effort. This is your leader here. And again, the last car championship, it must be earned. It cannot be given. So again, that will be the situation there. Patrick Emmerling, the number 53, both team owners of the Emmerling Gase Motorsports team are in last car Xfinity Series championship contention. And there he is right there, the number 53. Dawson Cram with CHK Racing. I want to make sure to give a point out on this. If you would like to sponsor a last car contending team, and I'm going to try to make a post on this on Twitter. I've been informed that the Harmon team, CHK Racing, is planning on attending this race, and they do need sponsorship. We did hear from some people back when they were spreading the word about this in Michigan. This is again the case here at Phoenix. So again, long haul for that team. If you want to sponsor a team that could potentially win a last car championship, definitely reach out to me on my DMs, or you can reach out to Mike Harmon at MikeHarmonRacing74@gmail.com. Definitely let them know there because they are looking for sponsorship for the number 74. So these guys should be there. I believe Cram will be the driver. I don't know on that 100%, but we'll find out there too. Carson Hocevar, who's only been a part-timer this year. Of course, he's going to run the Cup Series race at Phoenix. The 77 team, I don't know if they're expecting to run this race. This one is a much more remote possibility. I think this is one where it would require any other finishes from other drivers there at the same time. But he's still mathematically in contention, so he could potentially have it. So again, we have it with the number 77 car on the picture there. Anthony Alfredo, Tony Sauce is also a potential candidate here, the number 78. And then Kyle Weatherman and the number 91. We have the picture here Weatherman could be another chance at winning this. I believe it's Kansas he got last in the Tweaker Energy Shots machine. And then Riley Herbst, your winner at Las Vegas. Yes, indeed. He also has a last place run at Darlington back in the spring. That puts him in contention to potentially get the NASCAR championship. So, we're not done yet. Blaine Perkins is also a contender. I just talked about how great of a run he had back at Martinsville. Unfortunately, he does have a last place run earlier. I think this was, the Charlotte Roval or the Indy road course? It was one of the road courses, I think. He had a last place run out there. Number 02 team still in contention. Stephen Parsons. I don't know if he has a ride in Xfinity. I know he does in trucks this next weekend. He could potentially win the NASCAR Xfinity Championship. And I think this is the last one. Gray Galding, the number 08 here for the SS Greenlight effort, is another contender. And that goes back to Sam Mayer here. Watkins Glen. Thank you, Spencer. So, yeah. So those are your Xfinity Series NASCAR champions. All of these already set up here. So one of these is going to be staying down in Phoenix. Driver will probably, hopefully they'll hang on to it here. I have a special pouch that I've already picked up last year. It's not going to be big enough to put all of these inside it, but it will be able to be, allow me to keep my hands free whenever somebody has pulled ahead there to take the championship lead there. So that is how wide open that is. So this next Saturday is going to be one hell of a NASCAR battle. You're going to have a good portion of the field here. I think this is like 20 of these here. At least like 16, 17, 18 or so that are going to be really in actual legitimate chance of getting the NASCAR championship. So absolutely going to be a crazy situation here. Two of those drivers, I believe Hocevar and not Karam. I think it's Hocevar and Parker Chase are the biggest underdogs in this. I think not only the fact that they're probably not going to be entered in the race, but also the fact that I think they would have to count on Kligerman not getting a bottom five. Pretty much any of these other drivers, wherever Kligerman finishes, they would still get the championship. So it's going to be like, NASCAR winner, quote unquote, take all. So that's just the Xfinity Series. Now, we didn't have a Truck Series race this weekend, but we have those too. So let's talk about these contenders here too. So we got ourselves the Truck Series NASCAR Championship contenders here. The current leader right now is Josh Rialm in the number 33. So he is your leader along with his teammate Keith McGee, who apparently is working on some deals for next year. I don't know if that means either of them will be there. McGee was in this race last year and ended up getting in a tangle with Armani Williams. Williams ended up your last place finisher in this race last year. But they are not the only contenders because both of them only had 2 last place finishes. So here we go again. Smaller group here because in this particular case, the spread was such that you didn't have enough drivers with enough bottom 5s or bottom 10s to contend with Josh Rialm. So this is a group, I think, of only about 9 drivers here. Dean Thompson, who, of course, has had all kinds of bad luck this year, was a contender when he drove for Nice Motorsports. He's again a contender for Tricon Garage. So he's going to be one of the drivers to look for here. Colby Howard, the number 9 there for the effort there with CR7 Motorsports. I almost said CHK again. CR7, the effort there with the number 9 deal there. Greg Van Alst is still technically eligible for the NASCAR Truck Series championship, in spite of the fact, again, still looking to recover from his injury this year. But even in his part-time effort, he has been in a NASCAR contention for both the Xfinity and the Truck Series this season. So just in case he's entered, just make sure we're ready in as many of these contingencies as I could practically prepare for here. We got that one on hand too. Another one to look up. Our good buddy Stephen Malozzi is the biggest outside contender here. I think for him, it would require a different combination of bottom 5s or bottom 10s by Josh or Keith in the race, even if he finishes in last, because he's kind of a bit more of an outsider with fewer starts. So that potentially could be a different situation there. But Stephen is still technically eligible, so we went ahead and printed that one here too. Zane Smith, out of the championship 4 after his disqualification at Homestead. Of course, he was eliminated even before the disqualification. He is eligible for one of these too. So after falling out of the championship 4, he's still in a championship group here coming down to the last race. We got Josh Rialm, we mentioned him earlier. and of course his teammate Keith McGee. And then we have Lawless Allen, who's a past Phoenix last place finisher a couple years ago. He is a potential contender, and that rounds out your group of LASCAR Truck Series Championship. So, the fact that BJ McLeod locked up the LASCAR Cup Series Championship, again, pending the results of post-race inspection, could be definitely the situation there for him. It's going to be a much simpler one. May end up actually just giving him a certificate even before the race weekend starts. That would probably be the better way to do it. But then the Xfinity and the Truck Series deals here, those will be given during the race weekend. So look forward to that. So we'll probably have at least, we may, again, depending on the results of inspection, have just one certificate to print out tonight. But that'll be kind of our story there at the same time. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Definitely a little bit of different show and tell here at the same time. But yeah, just like that. I mean, again, it shows really how tight this championship is. That Kyle Sieg was able to get this first career last place finish in the next to last race of the year, and he could win it all. He could very well win it all just by having more bottom fives or bottom tens than Parker Kligerman, who, and again, I think this is another good measure of how good Kligerman's been this year. In spite of him not winning his first race, he has so few bottom fives and bottom tens that this many drivers could just as easily take the title from him, but they would have to pretty much in all those cases finish in last place or be classified last rather at Phoenix. The way we're going to work this out at the track, the plan is going to be about the same as in the past. If a driver is falling out of the race, NASCAR declares them out, and I can catch them while they're still at the track, I'm going to give them the certificate there at the end of the race. Usually the championship race, people aren't in so much of a rush to leave the track. It's usually not that much of an issue there at the time there, but that will be the case for the Truck Series race this next Friday night, and then the Xfinity Series race on that Saturday. But then the Cup Series deal, that'll actually be kind of nice at the end of it, all of it there, where the Cup one will pretty much, the championship will be settled, but we can still have some interesting last place action there about who actually gets the number there too, and that'll be the story. So we'll find out what the last story is going to be there at the same time. So it's going to be really big there too. Who could get it for ARCA West? I would defer to our other writers, William Saki and Ben Schneider, on that. I don't have certificates prepared for that. I don't remember what the scenario is on that because I've just kind of left that coverage to them this year, but I can take a look at that for you. Let's find out. If it's already been locked up, we could consider doing that too. So let's see. Hang on here, folks. Oh, I did just change providers on the domain host here on the site, so I may still have some issues with that, but we'll figure that out there as best we can. Oh, they've got to, come on. They've got to work this. All right, well, we'll figure that out there in a little bit. Where is the article? I think we can get the article from the most recent race here. Here we go. This is in ARCA. So Tim Monroe in ARCA from July. Got to separate that out. This is the West Series here. Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that one, folks. We'll find out on that and do that in the meantime here. Alrighty, good question there, Team F10. Is it FTINT Hub? Okay, excellent. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that too. We'll get that pulled up there and we'll find out what the situation is there too. And if certificates are needed, we may still do that. We'll find out. That'll be an interesting one. We have something planned with one of the West Series teams for that race, so that could potentially be coming up there too. Alrighty. Yeah, be quicker to say who isn't in contention. Yeah. I do apologize for the congestion here, folks. I'm getting something cleared up on that this week here before we go out there. It's just been a tough one this last month. I don't know exactly what the deal is, but we'll get that all figured out. Okay. So let's get into a couple other bits from this week. and find out. Let's see here. Alrighty. So, a couple of things. I'll just kind of bring up a little bit of housekeeping here in the meantime while I'm browsing this up here. So, looking forward to the release of the Derek Cope book. We reached another big goal on that to get the cover formatted there. We have the reviews put on the back cover, and there's going to be a page on the beginning of it there too, which has the ones that we've received from reviewers so far. So that will be in the book there as well. We're still set for the November 14th release, which will be for the paperback. We're aiming to get the digital ebook version available on the same day. And then the audiobook version, that requires additional processing after that link goes live. So certainly sometime in November, I'm anticipating that that's going to be online there. So that'll be very exciting. We're going to do some promotions for that unofficially there over at Phoenix. I just have like some cards I'm going to give out there with just kind of basic details on the book coming up. And on that Tuesday, November 14th, we will have a live stream here. We'll do a live watch along at the 1990 Daytona 500. May do a giveaway there during that as well. We'll have a chat in here. That'll be 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to bookmark that, we'll get that all set up there at the same time. The e-book, RD Fox. Yeah, no, thank you very much. So yeah, that'll be a different version that'll be coming up here very shortly too. Let's see here. Looking for an older post here. Okay, that's what we had this posted. Heartbreaker also, I didn't mention this in the Xfinity Series review. I hated it for Timmy Hill, who really had a good car in practice. I believe he was 8th fastest in Xfinity practice, and it didn't quite work out for him there, where he actually had like a really fast car, similar to Bristol. And Bristol, unfortunately, they had like issue. I think it was the rear gear that dropped him out of the race. But potentially, they could have had a really good run in this Martinsville race. They may or may not have dodged a bullet because of those two big wrecks that happened towards the end. But I'd like to think they would have at least navigated through that and had a solid finish there coming down to the finish. I hope they're going to be running next week at Phoenix. I don't know what the entry list is going to look like there. But that was sad too, especially since there was only 44 cars, shows my age there again. 39 cars for 38 spots after the Harmon team withdrew. That was an unfortunate deal there for them. But hopefully they can at least bring the same car to Phoenix, maybe have a good run out there. I don't know how much it directly correlates from one track to the next, but I guess we'll find out. Alrighty. So, I want to also talk about another subject on here, and I almost, excuse me for a sec. Another tweet that was posted on Bob Hocker's page here back on the 26th, and I want to kind of address this. I almost was going to make this a standalone subject here for the Patreon, but I was like, well, it's pretty close to the weekend. Let's kind of go ahead and jump into this. So, of course, it's not going to show up very well on the phone here on the screen, but we'll kind of jump into that. This is, of course, the subject of the charter for the number 51. So to read off, here's Pockris's tweet from the other day saying, NASCAR says it will not repossess Rick Ware Racing's number 51 charter, even if in the bottom 3 of charter teams this year. It'd be NASCAR's option and rule designed to prevent start and park. Rick Ware Racing's Roush Fenway Keselowski alliance, use of Roush Yates engines, signing Haley shows commitment to performance. Now, if you guys saw this, you probably had some questions as well. I did. First and foremost, there was never any indication when this charter program was introduced that if you were in the bottom 3 for 3 consecutive years, that it was all up to NASCAR's discretion if they were going to rescind somebody's charter after that. It was basically put forward that if you were in those bottom 3, you were going to lose their charter. In fact, there's a team I talked to that was told that was going to happen. So, and they saw both sides of this. What initially happened was, in acquiring the charter, they noticed this provision in there, and then were told, oh, well, we have that provision in there, but we're not going to enforce that. We're not going to enforce that. And so they went ahead and got the charter. Now, they get the charter, they operate the team, they're in the bottom three for 3 straight years. Then suddenly, somebody from NASCAR during the summer gets a hold of them and says, hey, look, you were in the bottom three, this the last 2 years. If you're going to be in the bottom 3 again, we're going to take the charter. You're not going to make any money off of it. You're going to lose it, and it's just going to be it. And they're like, wait a minute, you told us that you weren't going to enforce this provision of the agreement here, but that wasn't what they were told. So I'm having a hard time reconciling this with that. And it's so what's the point? What's the point? What's the point of having this whole provision in there? There's so much wrong with this. Again, nothing with Bob. He's just reporting it. But there's so much wrong with what he was told here. So again, if they were in the bottom 3, it was expressed, if you're in the bottom 3, you're going to lose the charter, period, because that's the whole idea. They want to take the charter back because there's other people that are willing to buy it, and and there's only a set number of them. They're showing no interest in actually increasing the number of charters. Although now they're waffling on, the charter system even existing, which I'm sure is probably, this is probably having something to do with that too. But it's NASCAR's option and a rule designed to prevent start and park. Okay, this needs to end. This needs to end. Start and park teams have not been in the Cup Series since at least 2015, which was before they instituted the charter system. When they were about to institute the charter system, even teams that had been starting parks, it's not like they hadn't existed, they had existed. Teams like Phil Parsons Racing, teams like Tommy Baldwin Racing, teams like others actually ran full races. They would run within a few laps of the leader. They would try to run races to the scheduled distance. They were eliminated before the charter system was ever introduced, before fields were reduced, before these teams were awarded, in many cases, a windfall for operating their teams. So to say this many years on, in 2023, that this provision is in there to prevent start and park, as if any of these teams has finished 36th every week, I can tell you right here that it has been very rare to have streaks of last place finishes by the same team, and it's not even been where different teams, it's not even like where it was in 2010, where start and park teams would work together and they would have a different team be in last place, because back then they would get harsher treatment in technical inspection if you were a last place finisher, because the car would get taken apart, and then that would be really expensive, and so it would go from one team to the next and so forth. But it's very rare that you see streaks of last place finishers, and I think that's been very much the case through most of this whole time with the charter system. And yet you've had a lot of teams that have just naturally closed, or just been forced out of business anyway, without even getting a chance to hit this 3-year mark. So I don't really get so this is where, when I was discussing this earlier this week, what's the definition of start and park then? If it's not that you're not having cars that are falling out early in the race, you're not having cars work out that, they're falling out of the race artificially. Remember at Homestead a couple years ago that there was an issue with this with a couple different teams? I think it was the number 66 car with Moffitt and a couple others they were looking at, and that they were communicating. And that was not even anything conclusive that they were definitely parking. It was just the appearance that they were. And people still ran with it and said, okay, well, that was a start and park situation. That was so exceedingly rare. It's definitely not been a week to week, much less year to year, as this would require in this case here for enforcement of it. So start and park hasn't happened in the Cup Series in these many years. So I'm forced to believe that if there's this different treatment for other teams versus this Rick Ware one, their definition of start and park must just be they're having consistent performance issues. And that's not what a start and park is. They need to call that something else. If there's a minimum performance requirement, if it's like they need to have an average of this many finishes, or maybe not finish last this often, or something like that, they need to make that very clear. This is not very clear at all. It's too nebulous. So what does that mean? And then the same situation here, showing commitment to performance. What the hell does that mean? That means nothing. It's a competitive sport. And I've talked to a lot of these teams back when they were starting parks. They're still trying to compete, even back then. I think that's downright insulting. You're not going to have a team. There's been maybe one or two in this entire span back to like 2009 that you could probably argue that they were on a business model where racing was secondary and they didn't care how they performed and all that. But even then, I think it was really hard to argue because they would still put together great qualifying setups, make sure they qualify for races, and they would still put a lot of money into super speedway races where they wouldn't park because they could potentially capitalize on there being big wrecks. So even then, it's like, what's the boogeyman about that? What's the big danger of having drivers in that situation? And so this is where, again, start and park and commitment to performance, it doesn't make any sense. And it's not clear at all. So I hope that NASCAR is going to make this a lot clearer and try to explain what on earth is happening here. And again, this is nothing against Rick Ware Racing. I'm happy they're not losing their charter. I don't think they should. Any of these teams should be forced to lose their charter. But it's forcing me to look at this and say, what was the intention all along of the charter system? This does nothing to change my view of it here, that it's been a situation where they wanted certain teams in and they wanted certain teams out. And that this was the best situation to, first of all, trim off the bottom of the field when they didn't need to make it 40 cars, and then set another limit where you have 36 ones that are locked in. That was also set by an arbitrary requirement based on commitment to like contributing to the sport, which the Wood brothers, remember, were not eligible for. You set all these limits and you're going to create a situation where it's like, okay, this is just going to make the competition better. But all it did was create a system based on failure, where now teams are given an incentive not to improve their organizations. They're given an incentive to cash out. And if the team was borderline, not even a bottom team, but a mid-pack tier team, teams like Germain, teams like Levine Family Racing, and I know people get critical about Starcom Racing, but I'll tell you this, those guys were putting everything they could in to the fan experience, to the paint schemes they ran multiple different sponsors, and back at the shop, improving their technology to get the best runs they could. Was Quinn Houff the best driver out in the field? I'm not going to pretend that was the situation. But the team, it's a team thing, not a driver situation. The team was improving, just like these other organizations were. Like the Levine family team that got the Toyota contract, like the Germain deal that worked with Childress. There was a commitment to performance, but what did they get for it? They ended up being forced out of the sport. And now you get other teams in there. And I'm happy that we have 2311. I'm happy that we have Trackhouse. I'm happy that we have these other organizations. But why couldn't we have had both? Why did it require breaking these eggs to make this omelet? Why didn't we already have it there? It's just so absurd to me. And then when you have something like this, it just shows it's like, okay, I think, quite honestly, the standard has changed. Whereas this one particular team was in a position that they were basically forced to sell their charter. And now you have another team where it falls under the same requirements that they've sold their charter. It's absurd. It's absurd. And I don't agree with it. And I think NASCAR really needs to make this way clearer. And I hope it does. I'm not holding my breath that it's going to. And if it's all on the RTA, well, then they need to make it clear too. But, are they in a contract with the RTA? Are they in a contract with NASCAR? Who's creating these requirements? And why is this all of a sudden matter? Why is this all of a sudden an indicator? Why wasn't it with a team that I knew about? Why wasn't their commitment to performance enough to keep them from losing their charter? It's absurd. It's absurd. So this is what really needs to kind of be figured out. And again, you don't have starting parks. You have different teams that are out there. And I know people are, and again, I was very surprised by the response to this, where people were pretty happy. It was just like, okay, well, they didn't seem to really have issues with it. So I don't get it. It's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate. So I don't know. It needs to be cleared up, because we're talking like, not only being a part of the sport, but selling your spot and your chance of ever getting back into the sport. And we're talking like, something like this, if you're dealing with the money, if you're dealing with like, this again, and I still think it's a windfall for the big teams because they're not going anywhere. I don't know why Hendrick needed charters. I don't know why Joe Gibbs needed charters, or Penske, or these other ones. They're not going anywhere. We're in a down economy now, and they're still there. Like, it's absurd They're never going to sell their charters. You know, what'll happen is they'll have somebody else operate the team. You know, it's just insane. So I don't know exactly what the problem is with this. But yeah, Beast of Metal, thank you for your mentions. Thank you for your super chat here. First of all, I actually recall reading back in 2016 that NASCAR reserved the right to revoke charters if teams fell in the bottom three for 3 straight years, which is both an important quirk and serves to show that McLeod and Starcom were bullied out. Well, yeah, even if they reserve the right, again, there's still at least from what I've been hearing that it wasn't presented to them that way. That it was not going to be enforced. Period. And it's like, well, whenever you see a contract and you see something in there, it's like, if this is not going to be enforced, what is it doing in the contract? That's going to be the first problem there. So, you know, and then, yeah, if it's not a situation where they're always going to, use it, then that better have been in the language there too. If they reserve the right, was that actually in the language of the contract itself? It's a fair point. And I think that needs to be made clear, because this is not clear. This is not clear at all. And it just doesn't jive with what's been happening with some of these other programs. And yeah, you have teams like Starcom and teams like the Levine family have been squeezed out. And ultimately, yes, the Live Fast team selling their charter and now being in a situation where they have to scale back to part-time. I mean, it's a sad situation on all fronts. And I know some people may not care. They'll be like, oh, well, this is great. Now Spire Motorsports gets 3 entries. Ooh, I still think that team's growing by too much. I think for how inconsistent they've still been this year, and Corey LaJoie trying to get some good runs, and Ty Dillon just really still struggling. I think going to 3 cars, even with Carson Hocevar, who I think is going to be good no matter what you put him in, I think that's biting off an awful lot. And buying Kyle Busch Motorsports and getting their truck team. I mean, it would be great if it worked. It would be great if it worked like it did with Trackhouse. I know that they had plenty of skepticism about if that program was going to be able to sufficiently maintain 2 Cup programs. But I think with Spire, I think it's too much. It's too much. All this other stuff there with the Kyle Busch team, and it's already switched over to Chevrolet, put all that money in there. I don't know. I mean, if it doesn't pick up that much more, I think that's going to be kind of a problem there too. But I don't know. So that one I thought was just kind of just absurd. So I don't know what these other, and again, I appreciate you bringing this up, Beast of Metal. So if the original language was up to their discretion, well, again, that should have been made more clear to the teams, and that should have been brought up in this message here too, talking about it's like, okay, it's designed to prevent start and park. Again, I really do feel like NASCAR doesn't understand start and parks very well. I'd be happy to help join the discussion if they need the help on this, because it really seems like, what are they still so scared about now? This program since 2016 has done so much to just eradicate not just bottom tier teams, like I said, mid-tier teams, which I think they weren't intending to eliminate from the sport. I think there's been a lot of collateral damage to this. If it was H. Scott, if it was Germain, if it was Levine family, if it was Furniture Row. I'm always so insulted when they bring up Furniture Row as the reason that they need to have the charter system. It's like, we had a championship team that had to shut down. Isn't that terrible? Conveniently forgetting that they had a charter and that charter went over to Spire Motorsports. That charter didn't save them at all. Absurd. I don't buy the storyline here on this. And I know I rally against this all the time, but I just keep hearing this other narrative, and it just makes me seem like, it's like, am I just not understanding this right? Am I just not seeing this? Is everybody else seeing something and I'm just not seeing here? Because this still just looks wrong. It just looks like it's a way to force out who you don't want in there and bring in who you do. And it's worse because you're not just saying it. You're not just doing it. You're not just saying like, okay, well, we want this guy in here and we don't want you in here, period. It's like the guy jumped on JD McDuffie's truck trying to park it in the garage area and say, no, you're not coming in here. It's like, if you're going to be that blatant about it, be blatant about it. It's the deception that's insulting. And creating these other requirements. A lot of people will look at that and be like, oh, okay. It's like, no. Think about that. There's no starting parks, and every team is competing against each other. They're trying to compete to improve themselves. So they all have a dedication to improvement. Nemco Motorsports in 2009 had a dedication to improve their team. And they had to start from nothing. So, of course, they were struggling. And this was, well before the charter system. So, I don't know. And it's especially frustrating when you see the Xfinity Series fields and the Truck Series fields as rich as they've been, even with fractions of what the purse is. The diversity of different teams out there, the drivers and talents that have been developed over there. We're just not seeing that in Cup. We're seeing a lot of stagnation, and I don't like it. I think that doesn't augur well for the future of the sport, no matter who you bring in, because you're just going to have fewer and fewer teams with fewer and fewer cars, and pretty soon you're going to have, a race of 15 people out there. As I quoted in the field fillers thing, people notice things like that. Fans notice that. And they're not going to sit down and learn about the charter system in general. They just care about the racing product, And while theoretically you could still have a good race between just two cars out there, I don't think people are going to be paying $90 a ticket and hotel fees and everything else to do that. So what are we doing here, folks? I don't get it. I don't get it. They need to make this clear. They need to make that clear. They certainly need to make it clear for the teams. It's alarming that the teams are not having this really understood for them, and if they want to put up this front to make it seem like they're going to get the chart. I mean, that's the other thing too. Is this a situation where they're going to say we're going to force you to sell a charter if you don't perform well enough, when in reality they're not going to do it? Well, that's not good either. You don't want them to be doing that. Imagine if this happened in any other sport. Imagine if you're the Cleveland Browns or something like that, and it's look, if you don't win the Super Bowl the next 3 years, we're gonna take your team, we're gonna take your assets, and we're gonna just move it all. We're gonna get the Mayflower trucks up for this and move it over to another city. And I guess constructively that happens from just what the owners do. But imagine if Roger Goodell did that and just said, nope, we're gonna take this and move it over here. Nobody would stand for it. Talk about something that would screw with the identity of anything. The sport gets away with it because there's not it's kind of like what was discussed earlier about these teams, that the teams don't have a tie to a city. They're all in Charlotte or in the Charlotte area. It's not the same as whether it's you have a community where it's in San Francisco or it's in Baltimore or it's in Cleveland or any place else. It's absurd. And I know comparisons to stick and ball sports make people roll their eyes, but you really, if you put this system anywhere else, it doesn't make sense. So I don't know. But that's just kind of the way it's all shaked out. So who knows? Kind of touching on a couple other points here at the same time. Talk about fan loyalty. This kind of ties into the same subject, I guess. I touched on this a little bit earlier, and for some reason, a lot of buzz was generated between other podcasts about this, about are fans really loyal to a team or a driver? Well, it's the drivers, period. I mean, fans don't care about the teams. Do you think fans care about the Owners' Championship? No, they don't. Generally not. I mean, if you really want to geek out about the sport, that'll be the case. And I heard on Door Bumper Clear, they made a good point about this. The exceptions seem to be the iconic teams. If you talk about the Wood Brothers, even though that's all a Penske organization now. If you talk about the Petties, even though that's now Jimmy Johnson, GMS, etc. Those are iconic numbers. I think it's so easy where people would rally behind those teams because they like the numbers, and they'll go for whoever's driving that number because they were a big Richard Petty fan, or a David Pearson fan, or a Morgan Shepherd fan, or whoever else in between. It's very hard for these other teams to do that. I don't even know if the 24 team at the Hendrick has accomplished this, or the 5 team is their founding number. You maybe could argue it there, but generally speaking, yeah, especially if it's a driver that's capable of winning. I think the other tricky part with that too is if it's a championship caliber team, which admittedly the Legacy Motor Club and the Wood Brothers, they're not in that area right now. They're still in a contention where they're trying to get good runs, and every once in a while they'll have great runs and then maybe potentially pull off a victory here or there. They're not in the same caliber as these championship caliber teams. So when you have a driver that moves from team to team, especially if they're championship caliber teams, again, look at this thing with Sheldon Creed coming up here in the Xfinity Series, they're going to follow that driver. they're not going to care which team it is or which manufacturer it is. It's just not like that right now, at least not broadly speaking. And so the star power comes from the drivers. And this kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the podcast with Denny Hamlin and so forth. I think what needs to happen, if you want star power, you need to let these drivers, you need to let people get to know these drivers. It's not that hard, folks. You need to let them be personalities. And, sometimes it's going to be a little tongue-in-cheek. Sometimes they're going to be a little bit, it's going to be a little bit different. But you want to have it be where, you create these larger-than-life personas here behind, the teams they drove for and everything. Behind the team, that's part of the picture. But the driver is literally the face of it. And that's where that needs to come in. But we're not hearing from a lot of these drivers because they're so afraid to say anything, that they think something else is going to happen. It's just absurd. It's those kind of situations there. So NASCAR needs to share in the responsibility of it. Because when you have Denny Hamlin say something on his podcast called Actions Detrimental, and you're going to give him the Actions Detrimental penalty, I mean, that is a real, it just quashes any other potential that you're going to have drivers saying anything else. And they need to be seen to be personalities too. They need to be promoted at different places. Put them back in the commercials. Put them back in the, have these sponsors, encourage these sponsors, to use their drivers. I mean, Slapshoes has already, gone chapter and verse into this in the past. They need to be seen as, as just regular figures. They're not just standing there. I mean, think about, again, Denny Hamlin in the pajamas commercial, the Domino's Pizza commercial. That one by itself got a whole lot of attention, and he didn't even hardly do anything in the ad. That's what it comes down to. So let's not go get hung up on like, is it drivers or teams? It's drivers, and that's what NASCAR needs to focus on, and that's what they need to also focus less on. Be less punitive, and again, not boys have at it. Have a situation where you just allow these drivers to be marketed. And that's what needs to come up there too. So that's kind of my take on that. The other one I kind of want to talk about, I want to give a shout out to Rick Houston over at the Scene Vault podcast there. And he's now having current efforts where he's been scanning the beginning issues of NASCAR Scene and preserving those, and really setting a goal for himself about how many of them he wants to scan and be able to digitize the archive as best as possible if the day comes that we are able to have a searchable archive one of these days. Obviously, the efforts that he's had have reached a standstill for reasons not of his own doing. I mean, he's been working his tail off there trying to make something happen there. But kudos to him for continuing the fight there and trying to make something happen. If nothing else, these are really old papers. I mean, they're, decades old. They get that yellowing effect where they start falling apart. You really got to make sure that this history is saved. I mean, any of the times I've done these videos where I've had access to them, I only think I consulted to 2, maybe 3 issues of it, the Derek Cope book. And in just those alone, a massive amount of information that really just provides the color to the stories of whether it's Derek's Daytona 500 win, his other win at Dover, or other events in between there. It really makes it come alive. And that's what you only get from the reporting that the people had when they were working back then, well before and through the early parts of the internet age. I appreciate that he's still working hard as ever. Again, the podcast is great still. If it's a Patreon or something like that, you're interested in checking out, you could do worse than signing up for the Scene Vault podcast one for sure. Because again, they are literally committed to preserving very real aspects of the sports history there. So definitely want to give a shout out to him as well. On the same note, do we have any other announcements on the inspection? Are we closer to announcing the closing of the Xfinity or the Cup Series Last Car Championship? Are we pretty close to that? I don't know if we are. Let me pull up the feed on the second screen here. Here we go. Whoop, I got another message here I'm going to have to follow up on here after the show. Let's see here. Let me check Pockrass's page. Xfinity finish. Blaney and Hamlin interviews. Not seeing it yet here. Cup owner points. Results. Lists Suarez out with DVP. That makes sense given the issues that he had there at the same time. Not seeing results here on this. I don't know if you guys got the announcements or anything on inspection. Let me check J-Ski. Yeah, we'll do some trivia too. Sorry, folks. Here, I know you're seeing me look off screen here a lot tonight, but we'll do some trivia here shortly. Actually, while I'm doing that, let's go ahead and pick categories. We'll bring out the late 90s deal here. I do apologize again for the congestion. I'm actually getting seen for this tomorrow, so hopefully through Phoenix and our coverage this weekend, it'll be better. It's better this week than it's better than it's ever been. But I'll tell you what, I don't know about you guys. Like ever since I get a cold, like it gets in my chest and it just doesn't get out. And I don't know, that didn't used to be a problem. It used to be like 2 weeks, you're gonna feel like hell, and then you're gonna, you kind of get to 70%, and then you can kind of go from there. But man, they just don't seem to go anywhere anymore. So I don't know. Alrighty. So in the meantime, let's do some questions here. So again, these categories, go ahead and recommend which category you'd like. NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card are the categories. NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Go ahead and make your picks for the categories. Anything else you'd like me to discuss that I haven't discussed yet from the weekend racing here, definitely let me know. I'll check these in the meantime. I don't believe we have a call here. GM has confirmed that the Camaro that had stopped, this is from Road and Track here, confirmed that the Camaro that had stopped during today's NASCAR Cup race was disabled by rubber debris from the track, damaging the wiring harness to the fuel pump. Specifically, the fuel pump wiring harness was pulled away by rubber on the track. So that was the issue there for that car. Okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing a call on inspection yet here either. So we'll keep an eye open on that. And then we'll figure this out. Whoop, hang on. Make sure it's not start playing some sound or anything. So while everybody's picking their category, I'll give you a little bit of a heads up here. So again, for those of you tuning in a bit late, this will be our last live show here for immediately after the checkered flag. Next week, I'm going to be traveling to Phoenix Raceway for our last coverage of 2023. We got some certificates to distribute here, as I showed you a little bit earlier. We'll be leaving on Wednesday. We got the door magnet set up here. It'll be on the car there for the trip down. If you're interested in joining the Patreon, any level, as little as $1 a month, at patreon.com/lastcaronbrock. Get your name added to the door magnet that's going to be on the side of the car. You'll be entered in a drawing to win it after we get back next week. I'll be covering the Cup Series, Xfinity, and Truck Series action this weekend and going from there. So we'll find out how that's all going to shake out. And, yeah, it's going to be a different one to find out. But, yeah, we're going to do some trackside coverage there this weekend. Yeah, I'd love to spread word and talk about the Derek Cope book coming up on November 14th. We'll do the trackside deal there for the top 3 series. Get some interviews for you guys here, pictures behind the scenes. Definitely stay tuned to the Twitter feed at Last Car on Brock for more updates on that. Yeah, it's going to be really exciting here at the same time. So really looking to get excited to get back to the track there. First time we've done some trackside coverage since Sears Point way back in June. Feels like longer than that, actually. But that's the way it kind of has been this year. But we'll be doing Phoenix. We'll be there Friday through Sunday. I don't know if I'm going to do a standalone meetup. I tried doing that last year. That was just hard to set up there. I might just piggyback on the Jeff Gluck and Pockrass one this year. So if you guys are at the track and you're interested in checking that out, we'll probably just meet up there and then do that. Yeah, we'll just kind of have some fun and just kind of be part of the mix there and see how it goes. But the championship's going to be big. There's going to be plenty enough to talk about there. For the top 3 series there. Some NASCAR championships to figure out at the same time. So I'm excited there to bring that to you guys. And we'll have you along for the ride. We'll do some pictures there on the trip back south here. And Last and I will be in attendance. Last will be in the stands there at the exit of turn 1. He always likes the exit of pit road there for viewing it, and I'll be in the infield. And yeah, gonna be great. It's gonna be good. It's starting to feel more real here this week here as we're getting set up there. We got the credentials locked up, so big thanks to NASCAR and the Phoenix Raceway for having me along for the ride here. And yeah, we'll finish the season on a high note here and see how that goes. So we'll find out. Alrighty. Yeah, Mark Bancroft, thanks for the suggestions here too. Yeah, Jesse loved RCR. I know that made a lot of people laugh when they were talking about Austin Hill being excited about a driver that's going to race him more clean, especially how Jesse's been racing in the ARCA series. I don't think it's the biggest concern, but it is absurd. I think compared to Sheldon Creed himself, especially how Hill's been driving, kind of stealing all the glory this year. Excuse me. I think that's kind of been the way that the wind's been blowing on that. But yeah, I think that was a little bit funny to hear on the interview too. Again, I don't think Austin Hill covered himself, and I don't think he made himself very marketable in his interview there after the race. I get his frustration. I mean, obviously, it's a terrible way to lose it, but he played a hand in that. He really did. So that was the case there too. Chris Hacker being reinstated. Yes, Mark, thank you for bringing that up too. Congratulations for Chris getting back out there. It's apparently completing the reinstatement process to get back out there. And again, his DWI case is still pending, and we'll see what the results of that are going to be. Again, I think that it's something that suitably should have been treated very seriously, understandably. And it's very fortunate that in his case, it wasn't a situation that, involved, any, at least from what we're hearing, was injured anybody else, but it certainly was a situation that could have been that serious too. So I appreciate that NASCAR treated that seriously, and I think that it does need to be looked at critically. But at the same time too, glad to see him back at the track. I've had the chance to talk with him in the past there. He's certainly had some good runs very early in the Xfinity Series career there, trying to find a place for himself, like a lot of these developing talents out there. And again, he's served what he had to serve for it. He was definitely, it wasn't a situation where he was just let off for nothing, and they didn't treat it like it was nothing. It was good that there was some process he had to work through on that. And from all intents and purposes, what we're seeing on social media, it seems like he's treated it as seriously as he should be. Yeah, it was good to see him back out there. I guess he's going to be running at Phoenix. We'll find out if that's the case. Yeah, we'll see what's the situation there. Don't have too much more to add on that. But I think with anything else, just like with a lot of these drivers, it's just one step at a time. So I think it's important to look at. Haley Deegan and Chase Caber got engaged. I wasn't aware of that. Kudos, congratulations to them. Fantastic. That's great. I don't follow too much of the off-track stuff here, but that would be another one to certainly look at too. But yeah, fantastic for them. Again, yeah, I'm afraid I don't have too much more to add on that too. I know Haley's been trying to find her place in the sport there at the same time, but we'll see. Alrighty, yeah, let's do some trivia questions. We have Tech Clear. It figures, right, when I'm pulling that up. Let me know in the chat which category had the most votes, and we'll do some questions from that here right after this. All right, there it is. 24 seconds ago by Bob Pockrass. Tech is complete. No issues. I almost said Dave Blaney. Ryan Blaney is the winner. Cup champion 4 is Christopher Bell, William Byron, Ryan Blaney, and Kyle Larson. So no issues. And let's do this. Let's do this. We have one more thing I have to do. I'm sorry, folks. We got to do this. Let me make sure I get this pulled up on the right thing. And we will... Where is it? Where is it? Not those. Not that. Nope. Back one. Over one. And okay. And here. Actually, let's do this. This is a good opportunity for the second screen. Alrighty, and there it is, folks. And BJ McLeod is a 3-time NASCAR Cup Series champion. Alrighty, so there it is. It is official, folks. BJ McLeod has locked up his 3rd NASCAR Cup Series championship there. The number 78 team there, the Live Fast effort. So only one certificate for that, and this will not be a situation where I'm going to have to print a whole ton of certificates for that one, which is good. The thing really did overheat setting that up. So we have that set up here at the same time. Alrighty. And let's switch this back. And there you go. So there's the new graphic for the NASCAR Xfinity Series, or NASCAR Cup Series Championship for 2023. So there you go. So congratulations to BJ McLeod, and congratulations to Ryan Blaney for his thrilling win today in Las Vegas. So there we go. So we'll have that on the page there and updated. So we'll only have 2 championships to declare in Phoenix next week, the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series, which will more than make up for it because those are going to be absolute dogfights, and we'll find out if that's going to be the case. So, which category do we have here? Teams had 3 votes. Okay, we'll do teams then. Let's do that. All right. First question. Who was crew chief for the 1997 NASCAR Winston Cup champion? I thought I was going to read something else. I'll read it again here. Who was crew chief for the 1997 NASCAR Winston Cup champion? Who was crew chief for the 1997 NASCAR Winston Cup champion is the question. I guess it's for Evernham and Robert Yates. Who was crew chief for the 1997 NASCAR Winston Cup champion? I believe 14 last place finishes for BJ McLeod as well, including today. And which actually ties in with Ryan Newman. I believe Newman had 14 when he got his at Bristol earlier this year. And other drivers. Actually, let me pull that up at the same time. That'll be a good one to check. See if the site's refreshing here. It should finish refreshing after doing that earlier. Now, Squarespace, you are not endearing yourself to me so far. Okay. Who was the crew chief for the 1997 NASCAR Winston Cup champion? And the answer is indeed Ray Evernham. A lot of you got that one. Ray Evernham is the correct one. Alrighty. A lot of you got that. Zachary Leffler, looks like you were the first one on that. Next question. What owner built cars that won 262 of 362 races from 1974 through 1985? Let me read that again. What owner built cars that won 262 of 362 races from 1974 through 1985? Alrighty. What's this? I've got another close points battle there too. That's good. Okay. Let me read the question again here. What owner built cars that won 262 of 362 races from 1974 through 1985? The answer is Banjo Matthews. Banjo Matthews. I guess it'd be car builder, not owner. It said owner, though. Yeah, it said owner. I mean, I guess he was team owner, too, but Banjo Matthews is the correct answer. Dirty Def, looks like you got it. I think you were the only one who got that, so there you go. Yeah, owner was a tricky way to phrase it. I'm not sure if I would have phrased it the same way. I would have said car builder. But, yeah, it said owner. Let's see here. Let's see. Here we go. This is a good question. Next question here, folks. Who drove 42 wins for himself and 6 wins for other owners in the 1950s? Who drove 42 wins for himself and 6 wins for other owners in the 50s? That is our next question. Alrighty. Alrighty. Who drove 42 wins for himself and 6 wins for other owners in the 50s? We got guesses for Herb Thomas, Lee Petty, Junior Johnson, Herb Thomas, Ed Jarrett, Marshall Teague. Alrighty. Alrighty, here we go. Who drove 42 wins for himself and 6 wins for other owners in the 50s? The answer is Herb Thomas. Herb Thomas. Zach Leffler, looks like you were the first one on that one, too. Alrighty. So last question here. We'll just do one more question here for the evening, folks. What driver won the championship and 18 races in 6 years for owner Raymond Beadle? What driver won the championship and 18 races in 6 years for owner Raymond Beadle is the question. It's a shame Banjo Matthews isn't in the Hall of Fame. Very good point. What driver won the championship, had 18 races in 6 years for owner Raymond Beadle? Okay, seeing several Rusty Wallaces coming up here. For Halloween here, I'm wearing the LaRue Snowblowers paint scheme jersey here from DGM Racing last year. I figured that would be a little fun to bring out here for this week. Always impressed by Alex Lebey's career there in particular. All right, here we go. What driver won the championship in 18 races in 6 years for owner Raymond Beadle? And the answer is indeed Rusty Wallace. A lot of you got that one there, Rusty Wallace. All righty. Well, folks, that will do it for the show this week. So, again, congratulations to Ryan Blaney on his tremendous win today in the Cup Series race at Martinsville and punching his ticket into the Championship 4. We now have the Championship 4 set in all 3 of the top series, and we'll be covering that next week in Phoenix. Again, we're going to be traveling out on Wednesday afternoon, covering the action, especially we're going to try to get there for Thursday evening, but definitely Friday through Sunday, and covering what's happening down there. Definitely stay tuned to @LastCarOnBrock for more updates on the website lastcar.info. And if you're interested in any other perks there, patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock is the site to go check out there. So again, big thanks everyone for tuning in here. Hope you had a great evening there. Congratulations to BJ McLeod for his third LastCar Cup Series championship. And again, as you know, we'll find out who the Xfinity and Truck Series champs will be. So again, have a great evening, everyone, and I'll see you all next time. The next show is going to be probably, I think it'll be like Wednesday after we get back. For more details on that, I'll try to post it on both the YouTube channel and the Twitter feed. But it will be after, it won't be on Sunday for the championship. It'll be after we get back. So it'll be an evening show on a weekday. And we'll do all the wrap up there from that weekend, and tell you what happened there over at the Phoenix Raceway there. So we'll find out. So stay tuned, everyone, and thanks again for watching.